All right, I'm interested in chiming in with my 2 cents on the topic of plural marriage or polygamy in church history with my personal experience and testimony. And my testimony doesn't come from the typical study of church history, testimony of Joseph Smith, pioneers, stuff like that. So I thought it might be helpful to throw this out there. I hear a few people talking about this kind of perspective on it, but not a lot. And it starts for me with a foundation in what we call the plan of salvation, or the doctrine of the eternal family. So in the restored gospel, we believe that when you are married, you're married for time and all eternity, and that when you choose a spouse, that you and your spouse will be spouses after you die. And that when you have children within that marriage, those children are entitled to be with you after you die, or in the afterlife, or in the eternities. And that God, through covenant, has promised that if we follow Him and honor our covenants, that He will help us see that that is ratified. And so I grew up with that doctrine being taught to me. I also grew up in a family where it was known growing up that my father's mother passed away when my father was about 10 years old, and my father's father remarried about a year later. And so through my father's teenage years, he had a stepmom. And then I grew up with his stepmom being my grandma. And that was, for me, the only grandma I knew on that side of the family. And I knew that she was my dad's stepmom. Like, that was something that came up in different times in different ways, and we talked about the situation and everything. And so I knew that Grandpa had been married twice, but in the family, it came up regularly that Grandpa was not only married twice, but he also had 2 wives. Meaning his first wife was going to be his first wife in the afterlife, in the eternities, and his second wife was going to be his wife in the eternities. And that those 2 women would stake claim to him in the afterlife, and that he would stake claim to those 2 women, and that they would be together. And there's different ways to phrase it, however you feel comfortable doing it, whatever. But I've heard my grandma, my grandpa's second wife, I've heard her make this joke several times, where she says, "Yeah, I've told my husband that he's got to what's the word she uses? Behave himself? I've told my husband that he's got to behave himself, because if not, me and the first wife, me and her, we're gonna gang up on him in the afterlife and teach him a lesson." And she would kind of chuckle, ha ha ha. So she's already got in her mind this idea that she is going to be partnered with another woman in the eternities. And so she's instilling this in us. And Grandpa doesn't mind, because he would rather have this scenario than be alone for decades and decades and decades. So the alternatives to this are very strange. And I thought about this growing up. I thought, like, okay, well, if it's not possible to be married to 2 wives, then that would get awkward, because Grandpa's got 4 kids with the first wife and 3 kids with the second. So which wife is going to be the one? Like, which one does God sanction? And then if that's a problem and only one wife gets sanctioned, then those other kids are not sanctioned, or they're not legitimate in God's eyes. And if that's true and you're only supposed to get married once, then he's supposed to be a bachelor or a widower for the rest of his life, which would be at this point like 50 some odd years, because he's still alive. He was supposed to be a bachelor the whole time, and none of that rang true to me. And so for me growing up, I always knew that that was the case, and that in that way we still practiced plural marriage. We don't do multiple wives that are alive at the same time, but apparently it's okay to have multiple wives if there's only one wife alive at the same time. So okay, that makes sense. And so that's always helped me kind of like brush off all the people that want to condemn that practice. They're trying to make sense, and they're trying to like pick apart the different words in the scriptures with Abraham and be like, oh no, that's not what it was talking about. And like it gets really complicated, convoluted. And for me, it never needed to be that way. It was always really simple, and I was just like, yeah, it makes sense to me. I do have a question though that I'm still working on, and I have some ideas of why this is or isn't, and like how to think through it and stuff, but I won't share them right now. But I do have a question for God, I guess, and that is, it seems to be okay for one husband to have multiple wives, but apparently it's not okay for one wife to have multiple husbands, and I don't know exactly why. Again, got some ideas, but for some reason there's a line drawn there. But for me, there was never a line drawn with God being okay with multiple wives. Like there's just too much leaning in the direction of how it's meant to work that way in some cases. And that's not to say that polygamy is, like a easy conversation. I've got polygamous relatives on my mom's side who were practicing back when it was practiced in the church. And it's an awkward topic. It's not great. Some of the stories are awesome. Some of the stories are not awesome. Some of the women got along really well. Some didn't. So there's mixed reviews on that side of it. But it makes sense that, like it says in Jacob, the norm, the way that it's meant to be is one man, one woman. And in some cases, God makes an exception. And I just think that I feel perfectly comfortable giving God the liberty to help us be together with the ones that we love through the eternities. If we're committed to Him, He'll make it work. Even if there's another wife, even if there's children coming from multiple wives, that somehow, some way, if we do our part, that He will see to it that no one is left behind or tossed out, and that we all belong to those that we love. So that's mostly where my testimony comes from. And again, I don't like that it gets real complicated. It never really has been complicated for me, so hopefully that helps somebody out there. Talk to you soon.